What do you think would happen if the empath stopped trying to heal everyone and finally began to live true to themselves? In this video, we'll journey deep into the inner world of the empath through the lens of Carl Jung's depth psychology, to explore why empaths were never meant to save others, but to become a quiet light for their own sacred path. In a world full of noise and confusion, where compassion is twisted into obligation, the empath is often forced into the role of savior. They bow their heads, endure in silence, and walk into the emotional storms of others as if they were saints. But Jung, the great decoder of the soul, saw something entirely different. He didn't romanticize kindness. He didn't glorify sacrifice. Instead, he looked beyond the polite masks and reached into the very roots of empathy, unconscious mirroring. Empaths are not here to heal. They are here to reflect, to become mirrors for what others refuse to see, to awaken truths the world would rather avoid. And because of that, they are often rejected, misunderstood, and accused of being too sensitive, too weak. But in truth, they are the first to hear the whispers of the shadow, the unheard wounds, the buried feelings hidden beneath society's smiling masks. Not everyone can carry that role for long, because empaths don't just hear pain, they feel it in their bones, in their very blood. But Jung would ask, is that feeling truly yours? Or is it someone else's projection onto you? That's where the story begins to bend. Because without awareness, the empath becomes a lifelong victim in the very story they believe they're here to heal. Yes, they have tender hearts, always ready to help, always putting others first. But Carl Jung saw something different. He didn't believe empaths came to be emotional doctors for the world. He saw them as mirrors, reflecting truths others are too afraid to face. And those truths are not always beautiful. Imagine walking into a room, and without saying a word, someone suddenly grows uneasy. They become irritable, avoid your eyes, or even blame you for things that make no sense. Not because you did anything wrong, but because a part of them, a buried, forgotten part, starts to awaken in your presence. You didn't mean to cause it, but your natural sensitivity allows you to feel the things they've tried so hard to hide: pain, anger, shame, envy. And that makes them feel unsafe. They don't want to be seen so clearly, because not everyone is ready to face themselves. Jung called it the shadow, the part of ourselves we most often deny or reject. And empaths, in their own quiet way, become the ones who awaken that shadow. Not through words, but through presence, through an open heart, through eyes that do not judge. But if the empath doesn't understand their true role, they will always feel hurt, isolated, and exhausted, because they believe it's their job to fix others, when in truth, their only task is to stay honest with themselves and brave enough to hold their presence, even when it makes others uncomfortable. When an empath doesn't understand their true power, they often get swept into the whirlwind of emotional responsibility. They hear someone's sadness and feel compelled to soothe it. They sense the anger hiding behind a forced smile and believe it's their duty to bring that person back to peace. Slowly, they begin to lose themselves. They feel drained without knowing why. The world starts to feel unbearably heavy. They can no longer tell which emotions are truly theirs and which belong to someone else. They live in a sea of tangled feelings, as if carrying a backpack full of the world's pain without ever being asked to. Carl Jung would say this: when you try to save someone from their shadow, you rob them of the chance to grow. Empaths were not born to fix broken souls. They are here to bring light, not to drag others out of the darkness at any cost. And that light, sometimes, is nothing more than a quiet presence. No judgment, no rush, just being. And sometimes the truth is this: people don't actually want to be healed. They only want someone to hold their discomfort for a while. They come to the empath seeking shelter, but eventually they resent the very understanding the empath offers. When empaths forget this, they easily become trapped in toxic relationships. They keep thinking, if I just love enough, they will change. But love is not about sacrificing yourself. Love is not about losing who you are just to keep someone else whole. Sometimes, the deepest form of healing is doing nothing, except being honest and fully present. Some empaths come from childhoods marked by deep trauma. They learned to listen in order to survive. They discovered that if they could sense emotions well enough, predict moods, and please the adults around them, they might get hurt a little less. And in that constant adaptation, they traded pieces of their childhood to become overly empathetic adults. Jung understood this well. He knew that many empaths weren't simply born that way. They were forged in environments where silence, caution, and hyper-awareness were survival tools. Sensitivity then is not just a gift, it is also a scar. And as they grow older, they carry that scar with them without even knowing it's there. So when an empath keeps trying to heal others, they're often really trying to heal the child within themselves. The child who was once unheard, who once tried so hard just to not be left behind. They believe that if they're good enough, kind enough, people will stay. People will finally love them the right way. But the truth is, no one can give you what you've never first given to yourself. Jung called this process individuation, a journey back to your truest self. And that journey, no one else can walk it for you. It begins the moment you stop trying to be the world's healer and start turning inward to heal yourself. Not by running away from everything, but by facing your own shadow and choosing not to look away. When the empath understands this, they are no longer lost. They no longer need to be a savior. They only need to become fully present, with themselves first. There's a deep truth rarely spoken to empaths. You don't have to be gentle all the time. You don't have to always be patient, always understanding. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is say no, to step back, to let someone carry their own emotional weight, instead of breaking your back trying to carry it for them. Empaths often feel guilty for doing that. They fear being seen as selfish. But Jung would remind them, you cannot awaken others by continuing to stay asleep with them. If you keep abandoning yourself to make others comfortable, you are slowly dimming your own inner light. The truth is, you are not meant to carry the world's pain. You are a torch. And sometimes, that light must be kept for yourself first, so you don't burn out in the very thing you mistook for compassion. Jung once said, "No one becomes enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." For the empath, this means learning to accept even the parts of themselves that aren't soft or graceful, the moments of anger, exhaustion, or the quiet ache of wanting to give up. Not to run from those feelings, but to hold them honestly, like an old friend who has been waiting to be seen. Because the light you offer to others will never be truly deep, unless it has been touched by the darkness within you. It is the reconciliation of these two opposites, light and shadow, that becomes the true gift of the empath. Not healing others, but being real, living from the wholeness of who you are. And from that, those who are truly ready will find their own healing reflected through your presence. When an empath begins to turn inward and truly see their role, something strange and beautiful happens. The world no longer exhausts them like it used to. They no longer feel the urge to respond to every sadness, every burst of anger, every heavy silence from others. They stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" every time someone pulls away. Instead, they learn how to stay with themselves, even when others can't. This is the most profound turning point in an empath's journey. They are no longer the peacemaker for everyone else's storms, no longer the one blaming themselves for how others feel. They understand now. Every person has their own shadow to face, and the empath is not meant to carry it, but to witness it from a distance, with quiet, compassionate presence. Jung once said, "The shadow disappears only when it is seen." But that seeing must be personal. No one can do it for you. And the empath, once they truly understand this, no longer throws themselves into relationships where they must trade their self-worth just to feel loved. They stop trying to change others. They learn to speak up when disrespected, to walk away when hurt, and to hold on to their love for themselves. Not because they've grown harsh, but because they've grown clear. Clear about boundaries, clear about their role, clear that they were never born to save anyone. They were born to be themselves, a deeply attuned, radiant human being. And that full presence, not forced, not people-pleasing, is what truly stirs something in others. There is a special kind of quiet that a mature empath carries, not the silence of repression, not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of someone who has stopped asking for permission to be who they are. In that silence, they no longer need to explain why they pulled away. They don't feel guilty for setting limits. They don't fear losing someone just because they said, enough. They've learned that true love doesn't demand self-erasure. It doesn't ask you to dissolve into another in order to be accepted. Jung would call this the sign of successful individuation, when a person steps out of the role they were once forced to play and begins to live as a whole, autonomous self, no longer ruled by the reactions of the world around them. For the empath, this is the journey home. They are no longer the healer. They are the one brave enough to live truthfully. And sometimes that looks like a simple life, but one filled with awareness, knowing when to give and when to hold back, knowing the difference between compassion and self-sacrifice, knowing they don't have to be fully understood to be worthy of love. When an empath dares to live this way, they become a different kind of light, not blinding, not loud, but steady and quiet. A light that doesn't try to save anyone, but invites those who are ready to see themselves more clearly, not through teaching, not through grand gestures, but through the way they simply are, day after day. That is when their role is no longer to heal others, but to awaken. And when an empath truly grasps this, that their presence is enough, that they don't have to do anything more to be worthy of love or existence, they begin to transform from within. They no longer anxiously wonder how to make someone stay. They are no longer moved by every glance, every mood, or every silence. They begin to walk with more steadiness, more lightness, not because they've toughened up, but because they've become more honest with themselves. And in that honesty, the empath no longer says yes when their whole being screams no, no longer smiles when their heart is breaking, no longer tries to understand someone so deeply that they lose the clarity of their own truth. They learn this. Love isn't always about understanding. Sometimes it's about letting go. Carl Jung knew this well. He understood that those with deeply empathetic hearts often walk a lonely path to reach that place. Not everyone will understand. Not everyone will support it. But individuation demands that courage. The courage to rise up from the very role they once clung to for survival and say, I don't need this role anymore. And then something strange happens. When the empath dares to live that way, they begin to connect with others in a real way, no longer out of duty, guilt, or the need to feel needed, but from a place of stillness, of wholeness, of freedom. From that place, the light they carry is no longer drained by those who aren't ready. It becomes a light that radiates without clinging. True freedom doesn't come when everyone loves you. It comes when you no longer need them to in order to feel worthy. And for the empath, that moment feels like the first deep breath after years of holding it in, slow, steady, and soul deep. It's the moment they realize their sensitivity is not a burden to hide, nor a crown to boast. It's simply one part of a much greater whole, beautiful, delicate, but no longer in control of their entire life. Because now, they've learned to stand in the world without being swept away by it. They no longer absorb others' emotions like a sponge. They feel, they listen, but they know. This is mine, that is theirs. In the depth of psychology, Jung would say, this is when the shadows integrated, when the empath no longer splits their strength from their softness, but allows both to exist side by side, supporting one another. This is when they no longer have to choose between loving others and loving themselves, because they've realized loving themselves is the only foundation for truly loving another. The empath now is no longer the nice one. They can be difficult when needed. They can speak hard truths. They can walk away from what hurts without explaining. But they can also show up fully in love, not clinging, not performing, just freely, authentically. And perhaps that is the deepest healing of all, not something they do, but something they become. If something inside you stirred while hearing this, a memory, a wound, or even a quiet knowing that says, I feel seen, then maybe you too are somewhere on your way back home to yourself. And if these words can walk beside you just a little longer, in the quiet nights, in the unanswered questions, or simply when you need a place to breathe, Let this space be that place, a space quiet enough for you to hear yourself and true enough that you never feel alone. You can subscribe, not for the noise, not for the crowd, but as a small promise that when you return, something deep will still be here, waiting for you. Thank you for being here exactly as you are.